that's around us, that composition is not going to be the same as what we find in an alveoli. Meaning, the makeup of it, the partial pressures of it are different. And in our understanding of movement of materials, how do things like to move from an area of high concentration to low, or vice versa? High to low. So therefore, the composition of the air around me will cause this composition to move based upon pressures of it. If pressure's too high, too low, if stuff likes to go from high to low, it'll cause it to move in the alveoli. And then pressures in my bloodstream will cause it to move from here to here. Pressures at my tissues will cause it to move from high to, do you see where I'm going with that? Okay? So pressures all around us. All right? Under pressure. Okay? Y'all know that one?
Queen and David.
Nuh-uh. Really? Okay, I'm not feeling so well. So, pressures are going to affect that. Whether that's this pressure out here, whether it's a pressure in one little alveoli itself, or whether that's a pressure going into the blood, or whether that's pressure going to a tissue. But things like to go from high to low. All right? So, to get movement, I got to deal with what I keep mentioning, that respiratory membrane, that fluid. Okay? So, I need oxygen to dissolve. I got to have CO2 dissolve. And in order for it needs to dissolve in the water, because that's what Henry told me. It's a law. If it's a law, it can't be changed. Okay? No matter how much work that researchers might have done, they can't change the fact that these gases have to be dissolved in this water to move. Henry said it. So, I've got to get it to dissolve, move across that respiratory membrane, go to the blood, and I need carbon dioxide to do the opposite, which I've already said, based on Henry's law. So, Henry tells me at a constant temperature, which is what?
So what?
98.6. Now, y'all know I'm going to do this, right? I'm getting ready to go out there and run that 10-mile marathon. What did I do to the temperature of my body?
You increased it.
What do you think is going to happen to my breathing rate?
It's going to increase.
Then I go to somewhere in Alaska where it's 50 below zero. What did I do?
Decrease your body temperature.
First of all, I didn't go. Okay? But that would decrease. Okay? So he tells me at a temperature. He doesn't say what. He just says at a constant temperature, which under normal conditions for the body, 98.6. There is an amount of a given gas. My oxygen, my CO2. There is an amount dissolved in a given type of volume of liquid. My respiratory membrane fluid, my water. And it will be proportional to the pressures. It'll want to go from high to low. Henry made a lot of sense. So, based on his law, at my alveoli, the blood lets the CO2 go and picks up my O2. Anything else that is greater than 1 atmosphere, 760 torr, if you all have ever heard of that, okay? Anything else will affect the partial pressures and therefore affect the movement. But his law doesn't change, because he tells me at a constant temperature, an amount of gas, a volume, and then partial pressures, which is based on another law. Go back and look at Dalton and Boyle and whoever else it was. Okay? Like I said, the gas laws were never one of my favorites. Okay? So Henry's law says that the solubility of the gas will determine how fast or how slow it moves. So CO2 is more soluble than O2, and therefore CO2 moves more easily, which is good because the CO2 in transport is going from my blood to my alveolus, and in my blood is toxic. So I want the CO2 to be more dissolvable. The O2 doesn't have to be as easily dissolved. So that can actually be a way that the body controls that oxygen, because the only way that the body can transport oxygen is on the iron, that hemoglobin, the heme, the iron. Everybody remember that? That's the only way. But my CO2, I can transport either dissolved in my blood or on the globin chain of hemoglobin. So I can transport that in a couple of ways. The thickness of the membrane will affect the movement. Under normal conditions, and that respiratory membrane being a normal thickness, will allow these gases to dissolve and move easily. Anything that will affect the thickness slows down the movement. The thicker the membrane, the harder the dissolvability, the harder the movement. There are certain diseases that can affect movement of the gases. Diseases that affect the alveolar surface area. Now, what does that mean? When you look at the alveoli, okay, and they look like a grape, okay, when they're doing this number with their nice infolding, they have a lot of surface area. Certain diseases, such as cancer and emphysema, do this number. What did I do to my surface area? I decreased it. And therefore make it harder for the gases to move. So anything that will decrease my alveolar surface area, it leads to lower oxygen. Oxygen is still coming in, okay? The problem is there's less surface area. I know it's, you look at it and you go, it's more. But this has gone from being 4 alveoli to 2. and therefore that surface area has decreased. And that means oxygen is still coming in, but all my little capillaries down here, they're not getting it. So people who have something such as emphysema, COPD, it's not that they are not getting oxygen, it's that the structure of their alveoli have changed and the exchange is affected. And so they have to use oxygen because their levels in the blood, checked by the pulse ox, i.e. pulse, blood, oxygen, are lower. Even though in the lung itself, it's not. So it actually, the oxygen actually helps force it across. Does that make sense? Okay. We have what's called ventilation perfusion coupling, meaning breathing in and the area getting fed, perfusion. Okay? This is physiological and therefore matches airflow with blood flow. So if my airflow is slow, it's going to be slow in the blood. Blood flow slow, slow for the air. Anything else that affects it in the blood and vice versa. Anything that can damage the lung area, in some cases, the blood can actually get shunted to another area of the lung for ventilation. But that depends upon what caused the lung function to be affected, first of all, and what is the damage of it. This is the reason that somebody can have a lobe removed and still be somewhat okay with breathing, because the blood will simply get shunted to the other lobe for perfusion. Is that kind of cool? It's kind of cool. So, let's see where we're at. All right, so we'll stop right there for today. You guys can use the time for studying for the practice.